Now, first of all, who was Ross Perot? I hear many of you asking. Well, he was a billionaire who was sick of how the traditional parties were governed in America. So what he wanted was a strong border with Mexico and was opposed to illegal immigration. He was opposed to the media and was very hostile towards them. He was opposed to China and to its growing influence. And on top of that, he was opposed to NAFTA and other free trade deals. Where have we heard this before? Oh yeah, Donald Trump, who actually ended up joining what ended up becoming the Reform Party. So Ross Perot, after losing this election, he ended up forming the Reform Party, and this was kind of based on this kind of platform. And so Donald Trump actually ran for the Reform Party presidential ticket in the 2000 election. However, he ended up dropping out because by that point they had become very disorganized and were kind of arguing amongst each other. So Ross Perot, think about him almost like Trump before Trump, right? And Ross Perot was doing very, very well in these debates as well. He won 3 out of 4 of them, according to the polls that were taken at the time. And on average, out of those 4 debates, he got 37% of the support, whereas Bill Clinton just got 30% and Bush got 18%. So, he was doing very well. However, at a certain point in the race, because of family issues and misreports about different scandals and etc., he ended up dropping out for a brief period. And although he came back, it ruined his credibility because people were like, well, this guy is not really that serious. And so as a result, he ended up getting 19% of the popular vote. But as we discussed in our previous video of what if the UK had proportional representation, so definitely check that out. America, just like Britain, has a first past the post system, and America has the electoral college, which is how they pick the president. So the president isn't directly elected, instead it's based on winning particular states and stuff. And because of the first past the post nature of American politics, it means that if you're a Democrat living in Texas, your vote doesn't count. And similarly, if you're a Republican living in California, your vote doesn't count. And this is the case for the vast majority of states. There's only a handful which are swing states, and those handful of swing states end up having 95% of campaign finance going towards them, right? Because they're the only states that really swing elections when it comes to election times. So one of the things that Ross Perot stood on was having term limits for congressmen and for senators, because oftentimes the same people end up staying in for decades and decades and decades. Bernie Sanders, but not just Bernie Sanders. Many other people from both sides of the aisle end up kind of just being dinosaurs. They end up just staying there for 30, 40, 50 years, and new people with new ideas and stuff, it's quite difficult for them to kind of get in. And also as well, if you don't like your congressman, because of the way that the congressional districts are drawn, it means that the same people end up getting re-elected again and again and again, because you have safe Republican seats and you have safe Democrat seats. So very few seats end up being contestable when it comes to at the time of the election. So in many cases, it really doesn't matter how you vote at election time in America, because based on where you are, you probably don't have any real say in the matter. So this is one of the things that he wanted to change by allowing people to directly vote for the president. So scrapping the whole electoral system and having direct elections of presidents. He also wanted to have campaign finance reform. So at the moment, you have lobbyists, and they can spend millions and millions. They can spend unlimited amounts at election time to try and win votes. And so he wanted to have some sort of way of regulating this so that people can't just basically buy votes. And finally, what he also wanted to do was to have a balanced budget amendment. So in the late 90s, this came very, very close to happening. And actually, I was tempted to do a alternative history on this of what if the balanced budget amendment had actually passed. And it would end up being lost in the Senate by 1 vote. So if this had actually happened, it would have meant that all the trillions and trillions of debt that they have got into in the last 20 or so years wouldn't have happened, because the balanced budget amendment would have said that the federal government would not be allowed to go into deficit. So each year they would have to tax more than they spend, or rather a better way of saying don't spend more than what you've raised in revenue. So this would have limited the growth of the federal government, but also it would have meant that the national debt would be a lot less. And famously, Ross Perot did a famous speech on this very issue, in which he said, "While the Cold War is ending, another war is upon us. In this war, the enemy is not the red flag of communism, but the red ink of our national debt. the red tape of our national bureaucracy. The casualties of this war are counted in lost jobs and in lost dreams. And so as a result, he had a kind of broad base of support, in particular with many independent voters and many moderate voters in the different parties. And so while he only got 19% of the popular vote, he ended up doing disproportionately well amongst certain demographics. In particular, he ended up doing very well amongst independents, conservative Democrats, and also moderate / liberal Republicans. And so people have often said, oh, that Bush ended up losing that election because he ended up taking votes away from him, and this is why Bill Clinton won. But actually, the data on this has shown that he took roughly an equal number of people from both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. So actually his base was relatively broad. Although on a demographic level, he tended to do particularly well amongst white voters, especially white voters in the suburbs, especially ones who were slightly younger than average as well. So he didn't do very well amongst minorities. He didn't do very well in the inner cities. He didn't do very well also in certain regions of the country as well, particularly like the South and in particular certain parts of the North. So his main base of support were in the Midwest and in the Western states.